I've always had this burning desire to be my own person or be my own chef and cook my own food and just give it a red hot go, and fingers crossed everybody loves it. And it's just great to not have those shackles anymore. Just freedom.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The events of the last year have brought many issues in the hospitality industry to the surface. The long, stressful hours, the pressure to be creative, to be different, to meet deadlines, to please critics, to stay afloat. The mental health of those in the industry is being addressed more than ever, but with an industry that lends itself to addiction and self-medication, how does one navigate the landscape and find balance? Jane Strode is the executive chef of the new A by Adina in Sydney CBD. Jane, how are you going?
Very well, thanks, Huck. How are you?
I'm good. You've got this amazing, exciting, huge new role. What's it been like putting the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together?
It's been, I'm pinching myself. I can't believe how lucky I am. I'm equal parts terrified and excited. It's really special to be part of something from the very beginning. And I feel very supported by my superiors. And I'm particularly excited about not having any previous staff members or food or, there's zero ghosts. It's a completely clean slate for me. And it's been a pretty crap couple of years. And I've lurched from being amazing to being at rock bottom many times. And just the timing of this feels like unbelievably perfect.
We can talk about the last couple of years and how difficult that's been for you at a later time during this chat, but this new project does sound pretty epic. I know that there's probably some things you can't tell us about yet, but what can you tell us about what you're doing there?
Well, it's the space, the restaurant, it's a bar-led restaurant and it's on level 22 and we have 360-degree views of the city. And it's super sexy. It's all black and gold and it's shiny, but there's matte, the porous materials as well. It feels like you're Ray Liotta in a Goodfellas movie. And wow. the guys that are doing the bar, the maybe Sammy's guys, are just impeccable at their craft. They're born to make you feel special. Hospitality just seeps through every pore, and they're really incredible storytellers. And it's a small kitchen, like a really small kitchen for a venue that has 194 rooms and 120 seats.
Wow.
Yeah, hence being terrified. But it's, I've worked in really small kitchens before, and the beauty of those kind of kitchens is that you can be very, very efficient. You can always put your hand on exactly what you need, and you can staff it, or your team can be lean and mean and tight because it's so efficient. So the food is all to be shared. It's food designed to drink with. I trained at Rockpool, so I love bold, simple, punchy flavours. I love the fact that there aren't any rules in Australian cuisine. As long as you understand the rules, you can go and break them all. And I keep trying to bring the food back in my mind it's kind of anchored in that 1950s New York Italian organised crime, danger. There's lots of conflict, but it's a really dynamic, exciting time to be alive.
Well, it sounds like you're the lead actor in a new movie.
Yeah, I feel like I am. I'm the lead actor in my own movie.
You mentioned that this opportunity that you've taken up also has, there's no ghosts, there's new staff, it's a clean slate. Tell us about that and what it's been like. Has there been challenges and benefits to that situation?
I think, I think, you know, being married to Jez and working with Jez, and we were a really incredible team. But he was the lead actor, and I played a supporting role in that team, I guess. And I think it was just natural. It was a natural thing. I was completely okay with it, but I've always had this burning desire to be my own person, or be my own chef and cook my own food and just give it a red hot go, and fingers crossed everybody loves it. Jez came from those luminaries such as Pierre Kaufman and Roger Verger, and, worked at the Waterside Inn, and he came with these European gods, on his shoulders. And that took up a lot of space. And it's just great to not have those shackles anymore. Just freedom.
You mentioned that the early days of Rockpool for you sort of have transferred into the way that you'd like to cook now, in the sort of simple techniques, big, bold flavors, keeping it simple on the plate. Is there any sort of dishes that you've been working on that you can tell us about that sort of exemplifies what you're doing?
Yeah, I've got this, I call it a fireball, and it had just kind of knocked around in my head ever since I came and saw the space back in December. And it's andouille that's blended with mascarpone. It's rolled in lemon rind and marjoram, and then it's wrapped in katifi pastry. And then we bake it. So the katifi pastry is really golden and crunchy, and the andouille is really spicy, but it's creamy and oozy. And then it sits on a little bit of tomato jam. And then we have some Westmont pickles. So there's acid, there's freshness, there's spiciness. It's all happening. And as soon as you eat it, you just want a beer. It doesn't matter what time of the day. It feels like, oh my God. And it's that ebb and flow, or that, being pulled in two different directions simultaneously. There's tension, it's exciting. Not so good if you're a vegetarian or have a gluten or dairy intolerance. But there's other things. But there's not that many ingredients in that dish.
Where did it all start for you? Let's go back to the early years of what led to a career in hospitality for you.
In food. Well, my mum started a catering business when we moved to Kalgoorlie in 81. And she and another expat and a Scottish lady, they didn't really have much to do. Both my dad and my mum's friend's husband, they both worked in the mines, and they could both cook, and they just went for it, and they made an absolute killing. And they learned on the way, and it wasn't about the trouble you got into, it was how you got out of it. And they just laughed. They were laughing all the time. It didn't matter, how much trouble they were in. They just laughed, and I just loved it. It was infectious, and it was exciting. So, yeah, my mum would sit me at the dining room table and go, okay, Jane, here's the phyllo, here's the feta cheese. I need 1,000 triangles, and off I'd go at 8 or 9 years old. Yeah. So I feel like I've been doing it for forever. But it took me, I started my apprenticeship when I was 21. I kind of faffed around. I did a year of uni. I went overseas. I bought a car, moved out of home, did all those kind of things. But I'm glad that I was a bit of a late starter, because Rockpool was so mind-blowing and so hard physically, and it was just another world that I was really glad to have had some life experience. I wouldn't have like to have done that as a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old.
Do you have any stories of sort of what the challenges were of that period, but also sort of what you took from that?
No stories that won't get me into trouble. I remember we never drank any water because we never had time to go to the bathroom. So we'd work 16 hours and then go, oh, hang on, I haven't been to the bathroom all day. Like it was the day I started. It was in September in 1996, and we just won Best Restaurant in the Gourmet Traveller. So it was a really heady time to be in that restaurant. And Neil was there a lot. He just launched his cookbook. It was really special. And I worked with some incredible chefs, and I'm still really, really good friends with several of those chefs. We've been friends for over 25 years. And I had I was so fortunate to spend 9 months underneath Lorraine Godsmark in the pastry section. And she was my first mentor, and she's relentless in her perfectionism and in her absolute conviction and desire to get you to be the most efficient machine you could possibly be. I remember learning how to whisk egg whites in our great big copper bowl for the passion fruit soufflés, which were like just eating passion fruit air. And I'd be whisking with the balloon whisk, and she'd go, no, and she'd show me, and then I'd have another go, and then she'd show me. And that we went back and forth maybe 16 times.
Wow.
And I'm in my head, I'm going, come on, Lozzie, come on, it's Coke. I'm doing it exactly the same, but that's just how she was. And at the time it felt excruciating, but it was so worth it.
You decided to move to Melbourne and work at Langton's. What triggered that move?
I just needed a change, I think. And I'd holidayed in Melbourne many times, and I loved the food scene, and I just liked the idea of living in a different city.
It was a pretty key period of time. That's when you met Jeremy Strode. Tell us what it was like working there, because you both then ventured on to Sydney to do all of the amazing things that you gifted Sydney. What was it like in those early days?
Well, I worked for Jez for about a year before we really had a conversation. We used to sometimes I was in the pastry section, and he was running the rest of the kitchen. And I had a pastry chef, Emma Mackay, who was also amazing, that I just reported directly to her. And it was a 250-seater beast of a place. So we were always really busy. And Jez and I used to get on the tram together sometimes, because we both lived in St Kilda, and we'd catch the Fitzroy tram to work. And I'd get on and be like, oh, God, don't sit next to me. I won't know what to say. And we'd get on and we'd be opposite each other, and he'd go, morning, Jane. And he'd just get the paper and open it up right in front of him. And he wouldn't say another word to me. And it was like that for a year. And then we just slowly, I think Emma went away for 10 weeks on holidays, and I ran the pastry section. So we had to communicate, and I talked about my time at Rockpool and making harissa and putting prawns and smoked oysters, and he was just really he was just thirsty for knowledge all the time. He wanted to know everything. So we just really connected over talking about food and different experiences, and we'd come from vastly different worlds.
You moved back to Sydney to run MG Garage, which left an indelible mark on Australia's culinary landscape. Tell us about that period of time and what you got from that venue.
Yeah, that was really a really interesting time in our lives. There are definitely things that we would have done differently. It was an incredible space. And it got us to Sydney, but there were things that beyond our control that just weren't right. Yeah. But I always wanted to, I was born in Brisbane. I grew up in Kalgoorlie. I met Jez in Melbourne, but I'm very much a Sydney girl. So it was great to be back.
You mentioned you're very used to working in tiny kitchens, and Strode in Surrey Hills was a tiny kitchen, and you also lived above it. What was it like running that tiny venue, living above it, and trying to remain viable as well?
Yeah, it was very, very stressful. It was a tiny kitchen, but it was only a 40-seater bistro. So, and I think because we lived upstairs and the office, you had to go through my kitchen upstairs and the living room to get to the wine stores, to then go upstairs into the office. So anyone that worked for us became family, like well and truly family. And there's no one that worked for us, especially in like a managerial or a chefing position, that I don't consider family. Hunter turned 6 months the day we opened. So
wow.
he was in a high chair. I was feeding him Farex, that really dodgy first solid, and churning ice cream and shucking oysters and, putting out fires. And then Nathaniel, it was really wonderful actually to have a baby and then come home and then there's people all around, because it's really isolating when you're a first-time mum. And, Jez would go to work and it'd just be me and Hunter in an apartment. But with Nathaniel, there were people around all the time. I could always just go and engage with people, or someone could pop up and say hello. But then once Jez took Bistro to the CBD hotel and I stayed on running the original Bistro until we sold it, I would have a nanny pick Hunter up from school and come bring him back to the house and then look after Nathaniel. And then at 8 o'clock, everyone would eat staff meal together. And then at 8 o'clock, I'd run up and grab the baby monitor and kiss the kids and bring it back into the restaurant, and she'd go home and I'd keep working. So yeah, it was intense. It was madness actually. Like I did everything from buy the ice to stock the wine shelves to pay the bills, everything. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend having your own business to anybody. I just wouldn't. And then if you go and do it, good on you, and you make it work, that's brilliant. But yeah, I wouldn't ever do it again.
One of the interesting things with your career has been all the peripheral things you've done around the restaurants, whether it's the columns that you had for years in Good Food, or the cookbooks, or volunteering at Crown Street Public School with a kitchen garden. Tell us about all those things and how important they were to you.
Well, it gave me a bit of a side hustle, I guess. I spoke about how much room Jez took in the chefing partnership that we had. So I was able to own those projects, which I really enjoyed. I love writing. I actually really like writing recipes. But running the kitchen garden at the kids' school was a really, really special project for me to do. I love teaching. I really love teaching kids, and I love when you can really get into their brains from a very early age how wonderful and magical and how scientific, and how you can churn your own butter and make your own pasta. And one time I brought in a whole massive squid and ripped out the head and the guts and pulled off the wings, and they're all like, that's gross. And I'm like, this is real food. And then we cooked it all up and they all ate it. And some of these kids would have never tried squid. So it's really, really, really exciting and very, very gratifying to like blow minds, little small minds. And the garden, I can't garden, but at all. But my partner in crime at the time is an excellent gardener. And I just really felt like I was giving back and using my skill set to give back.
You mentioned the amazing partnership that you and Jeremy had with the different venues, and heavily weighted towards him in the public eye, and also with the weight of his experience. The last couple of years have not been easy for you at all. You mentioned the highs and lows. Tell us about what it's been like the last couple of years since Jeremy left us.
I mean, everybody deals with their own things very, very differently. And the big thing for me was I had all these really conflicting emotions and I couldn't reconcile them. And I just felt torn in different directions all the time. So I was filled with rage, and I still am. But there was relief as well, which is like completely different emotion. And I was, when you love someone that has a mental illness, it's like there's another person in that relationship that you have to deal with, sometimes more than other times. And when Jez was really manic, and he was manic about once a year for about 3 months, he was a completely different person. And cumulatively that had really, really took its toll on me. So there was relief that I wouldn't have to deal with that part of him anymore. I'm devastated for my kids and all of Jez's family and the greater hospitality community, and I'm trying desperately to be who they think I should be. And there really has been no space for me to even feel sad about it. And it's kind of what people expect you to feel. So I had to find a way, and it was just time really, to just be okay with that it's absolutely okay for me to feel all those things. And it doesn't mean that I'm not sad or that I don't love him or that I'm not devastated, but they're all like really authentic emotions. And I guess when anything really shocking and traumatic like that happens, there's this huge dump of adrenaline that you don't really expect, and people say things to you like grief isn't linear. You might feel good one day, but then you'll feel really bad the other day. And they're all just words, like it's all just noise until you live through it. So a lot of soul searching, and a lot of like falling down and then picking myself.
What's been some of the key things that have helped you pick yourself back up again during this time?
I knew that I would get to a place where I was okay eventually.
The industry is known for particularly stressful situations and hours, and lends itself to all sorts of things like addiction, and it's never been very good at dealing with mental health issues. How do you see the issues in the industry, given such a deep personal experience as yours?
I think I've been thinking about this a lot. So we're in the business of dopamine, and we when you cook for somebody and you provide someone with sustenance, but also wonder and mystery, your system is flooded with dopamine and this beautiful feel-good hormone. But it's almost like we're in deficit in the kitchen because we work really hard and it's physically demanding, and you cut yourself and you burn yourself. And if you work for a big company, there's all the pressure to get a food cost and get your wages down, and everything has to there's so many time constraints and time pressures. And then if you are a small business, if you're not busy, or if you're not, if the numbers don't work for you, that means that you don't have any money. You can't pay your mortgage. So these are real stressful things, but we're not saving lives. We're not brain surgeons. We're just cooking food. So it feels like there's this real disconnect between how incredibly stressful it is and what we're actually just feeding people, hopefully yummy food. And so we look for dopamine in other areas, booze, drugs, just partying, and it's not sustainable, and it just compounds. If we are anxious, or we are depressed, or we are strung out, those quick fixes just compound the issues that we already have. And it's very much a play hard, work hard kind of mentality. And as Australia particularly has this culture of drinking and, oh, you're really hungover. Oh, yeah, well, I was really hungover yesterday. Like, we just kind of give each other permission to be like that, behave like that, because we were that person yesterday, or we'll be that person tomorrow. And no one really says, I think you've been hitting it a bit hard, because we don't want that judgment turned around on ourselves. But I believe that, Jez had a significant mental illness, and I believe being a chef and being part of this industry was one of the things that kept him alive for as long as he was alive. And I really believe that when he wasn't manic and he was depressed, and he was quiet then, and he just I think he just fought the good fight every single year that he was in that state, to not do what he did. He just fought and hung on for as long as he could. So, but because he wasn't talking about it, because he was quiet and just, he'd get up and go to work and come home, and there was that relief that he wasn't really manic, we just kind of didn't pay enough attention. And having never been suicidal, I don't think you can really ever get your head around what that means for that person, like how truly excruciating that must be. It's a really, I'm torn again with trying to get how he must have felt to be able to do it, with how could you do it? How could you leave my kids and me, So it's just complicated.
One of the amazing things you've done in the last year is working with Too Good Co, which is helping people with all sorts of things in regards to homelessness and mental health. And it's an incredible dynamic company. Can you tell us about your role there and what impact it had on you?
I came on board as the head chef, and I was super excited, and I love teaching people, and I love teaching children, and we employ women over 50 that are suffering facing homelessness, or suffered domestic violence or some kind of trauma. And I thought, because I'd been through trauma, I'd be really good at teaching people that had been through trauma, but I'm not as good as I'd like to be. I really missed that, being in a professional kitchen, and I crave perfection. And the women that came through were so beautiful, and they gave us everything, but they weren't there to be chefs. So I struggled with that, but I learned so much about compassion and second chances, and how you can really, like, food really is the language of love, and how you just time and effort and just can communicate so much, and sometimes that's all somebody needs, is to know that there's one other person out there that is a complete stranger but actually really cares about them, and that they're not alone, and that their well-being is important. And that's what Too Good does just so exceptionally well.
You mentioned that the last couple of years you've had to focus on what people expect you to be. But is this new role and the sort of leading role that you're taking with Adina, is that allowing you to just focus on being the you that you want to be?
Yeah, I think so. I love that there's a lot of different menus. There's in-room dining, there's breakfast, there's dinner, there's a 24-hour menu. I love that the food we're serving at Dean and Nancy is sharing plates. I never want to have to order a main course in my life ever again. Ideally, I just go to a restaurant and go, oh, hey, just give me what's good. And that's, the mystery, and not having to order and food just coming out is the best way to eat, I think. And I'm able to do that in that space.
Given the last couple of years, you're putting the pieces of the puzzle back together and putting yourself back together, and this new exciting opportunity, what sort of advice do you have for people in the industry sort of dealing with challenges and that sort of environment that you talked about that's so stressful to work in?
Advice. I feel like you've got to work for people or with people that get you, that you respect, that, and more and more these days that work-life balance is we're finally getting it, that it's for any longevity. That's essential. You have to have 2 days off in a row. You have to have time with your family. You have to be able to exercise. So maybe don't work for a company or an organisation that doesn't really put that at the front. And there's no staff. So anyone that's a chef or an employee has really got all the power. So if you go somewhere and they're not going to offer that to you, then just go somewhere else. Like, we're all screaming for chefs, especially good chefs. So use that power, and I think really, really know what your priorities are and what your motivation for doing something is. I think once I was trying so hard to be all these things for all these different people, and it wasn't working at all. And I even going to Too Good, I've been through trauma. I'm going to help people that have gone through trauma, and it wasn't the right thing for me, not at this time in my life anyway. But every decision I make, I think, will this make my kids feel proud of me, and will it make my kids feel safe? So when I say safe, I mean I'm not going to take a job where I'm working all the time and they never see me. And every decision I make, if I put it through that filter and I get 2 yeses, then I just go for it. Well,
Jane, very much looking forward to seeing what happens with Adina, and we're very, very honoured to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to share your story. Perhaps we can catch up down the track once you're all up and running and see how things are going.
Love to.
We'd love to talk to you again. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Huck.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe, and be well.